Hi everyone, this is a tutorial on how to use radio to answer an open-ended question. Please feel free to go to any parts of the video that you might need extra help on, and watch the video as many times as you need. What is radio? Radio is a mnemonic device to help us remember how to answer open-ended questions. A mnemonic device is simply an easier way to help us remember information. In this case, each letter of the word radio represents a step to help you answer an open-ended question. What is radio? Let's break it down. R. Read and restate the question. A. Answer all parts of the question. D. Give details from the text. I. Give insight. O. Overall conclusion. Be sure to memorize this. What is an open-ended question? An open-ended question is any question that requires you to write a complex answer. They force us to think deeply about a subject. They have multiple parts. They require details and require insight. As you can see, your answer cannot simply be a yes or no answer. And it's pretty safe to say that a sentence or two is probably not going to be good enough either. When do we see open-ended questions? Well, they're everywhere. They can be found in all of the disciplines: English, math, science, and history. You can also see them in all of your assignments, tests, quizzes, homework, and classwork can all contain open-ended questions. Most importantly, open-ended questions are a requirement to pass the HESPA. Typically, we answer an open-ended question after we read a text. What does an open-ended question look like? Well, it really can come in any form as long as it's asking for a complex answer. I'd like to focus on the HESPA. So, on the HESPA, it typically begins with a prompt or a setup, and then it has two bullet-pointed questions. Why don't we look at an example using the text "The Translator" by Daoud Hari. Here's a question that might look familiar to you if you are in my English 11 class. In the text, Daoud explains that traveling in the desert is very dangerous for refugees. According to Daoud, what do travelers need to know to survive in the Sahara? Why is travel in the desert so risky? If you look at the blue arrow, it's pointing to the prompt, or the setup. Notice this isn't really asking you any kind of question, but it is providing you with some information to help guide you in your answer. The second arrow is showing you two bullet point questions. Both are required in order to answer the question successfully. Let's look at radio. R. Read and restate. Good writers restate the question. Why is that? Well, restating a question indicates to your reader the topic you will discuss. Let's try to read and restate. Here's the first part of the question. This is the first bullet. According to Daoud, what do travelers need to know to survive in the Sahara? Do you know how you might restate this question? Think about it. Here's my answer. I said, according to Daoud, travelers need to know how to navigate by using the stars as their guide. Do you notice any similarities between the question and my answer? In case you didn't find it yet, how about now? Okay, at this point it should be pretty obvious. If you notice all the highlighted sections in the question, they basically match the highlighted section in my answer. It's pretty easy to restate the question, right? Alright, let's move on. A stands for answer all parts. It might seem pretty obvious to you, but the fact of the matter is, because open-ended items typically ask multiple questions, students often forget to answer every part. Here's a tip for you. As you work through the questions, check off or cross out a question after you've answered it. Can we safely say that we're done with the letter A of radio? Your answer should be no, because right now we're only answering the first bulleted question, and later on we're going to have to answer the second bullet. So for now, we're going to have to put A to the side and move on to letter D of radio. Letter D stands for Give Details from the Text. Good writers give details from the text because it makes them credible or believable. People who assess you also need to know that you can relate your own ideas to the ideas of the writer. Details from the text prove this. It's also great practice for writing research papers. Let's try to give some details from the text. Here's the question. You should be familiar with it already. And here's my answer. The first sentence is where we restated the question, and the second sentence is new. This is where the details are located. I said, on page 19, Dowd explains that electronic navigation, such as GPS, is unreliable because the heat and sand damage the equipment. Take note that I mentioned the page number, and afterwards, I basically have a summary or paraphrase of what I've read on that page. Do you think this one detail is enough to support that we know what we're talking about? Hopefully you said no. We do need at least one more detail. This is what I found. Dowd also mentions that a traditional compass can easily be lost in the sand during a storm, and therefore stars are the best way to avoid being lost. Typically, you really do want to use at least 2 details to back up your answer. I. Give insight. What is insight? Well, insight is observation or reflection. It's as simple as that. Good writers reflect on the facts and details they provide to create a well-rounded response. Let's try to give insight. Here's the question. You should be familiar with it by now. And here's my answer so far. Notice again I've restated the question, and I have 2 details from the text. The way I give insight is by reflecting on those 2 details. This is what I came up with. The desert is a very dangerous place with very little modern development. It makes sense that Dowd would instead rely on a 1,000-year-old method to find his way, rather than modern technology. Notice these 2 sentences are made up entirely with my own words. I'm not borrowing from the text anymore. However, I am reflecting on those details that I've given. O stands for overall conclusion. Good writers form conclusions to inform their readers of their final judgment on the topic at hand. If you have trouble writing a conclusion, ask yourself, what have I learned from this answer? Are we ready to give an overall conclusion? Have we really answered all parts of the question? Well, I feel fairly certain that we've answered the first bullet point. But have we answered the second bullet point? Why is travel in the desert so risky? The answer is no. So as of right now, we are unable to give an overall conclusion. We must go back to the beginning of radio and start with R. Let's try to answer the second bullet. R. Do you remember what R stands for? Restate the question. So the question is, why is travel in the desert so risky? How would you restate this? Here's my answer. Travel in the desert is so risky because the elements are very dangerous. Pretty simple, right? I think we're ready to move on. A. Do you remember what A stands for? Answer all parts. Have we answered all parts of the question? Let's take a look at the bullets. Bullet number 1. I feel very certain that we've definitely answered this question. So I'm going to cross it off. For bullet point number 2, that's the one that we're answering right now. Now stop for a moment. Do we have to answer anything else after this second bullet? No, we don't. So I feel fairly confident that we're going to answer this question because we're in the process of doing so right now. So I'm also going to cross that off as well. We can safely say that we have completed A of radio. Let's move on. Do you remember what D represents? Give details from the text. Here's our answer so far. We restated the question, and now I'm going to give details from the text. On page 19, Dowd explains that in the summer months, the sun and heat are very hard on the camels. He also explains that the freezing sandstorms will cut your face if you do not seek shelter. Notice I did something a little different here. I still mentioned the page number, but this time I used quotes. Quotes and paraphrasing, one's not necessarily better than the other. However, you should try to use both whenever you can. I. Do you remember what I stands for? Give insight. Remember, insight, we are reflecting on the details that we have given. Here's what I put. Due to the opposite extremes of the desert weather, it must make it very risky and dangerous for someone to venture through. Do you remember what O stands for? Overall conclusion. Now, in order to do an overall conclusion, you need to look at both bullet points. So I've provided them for you here. But notice the paragraph we're dealing with is the second paragraph. Your overall conclusion goes in your second paragraph, but deals with both bullets. Here's what I came up with. It is clear that in order for any traveler to survive, they must have a vast knowledge of navigational and safety techniques due to the desert's dangerous qualities. Let's put that all together. This is what your answer should look like. Notice there were 2 bullet questions, so I have 2 paragraphs. Now, this might look like a lot to you, but the fact of the matter is, this is exactly what a good answer should look like. If you can do this, then you can get a perfect score on the HESPA. Let's review quickly. Remember, radio. Read and restate the question. Answer all parts of the question. Give details from the text. Give insight. Overall conclusion. Please remember to memorize radio and go back to any sections of the video that might have been giving you trouble. Feel free to rewatch it as many times as you need, and good luck.